Hello, everyone. Welcome to our discussion on ethical ideas and student activism. My name is Belle, pronouns she, her, hers, and I'm the social media coordinator for the Ethics Center at Fresno State and will be the moderator for today's conversation. This is our online version of the Leon S. Peters lecture series, and I'm glad that all of y'all can join us today. Today, we have student leaders discussing their experiences on and off-campus student activism. We'd like to thank the Leon S. Peters Foundation for supporting us and making this event happen. This is a friendly reminder that if y'all have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat box. First, I'd like to introduce Deangelique Jackson, who's the president of Fresno State's NAACP Collegiate Chapter, and Serenity, who's the president publicity chair. So I'm going to go ahead and pass this on so Deangelique and Serenity will have the opportunity to introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Deangelique Jackson. As Belle said, I'm currently the president for the Fresno State chapter of the NAACP. I am a student at Fresno State. I am studying a special major of social psychology. And yeah, I'm in my 5th year. Serenity?
Hello, my name is Serenity White Ilole. I am the current press and publicity chairwoman for the Fresno State NAACP.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us, NAACP. We're really excited to have y'all here. So we just wanted to go ahead and jump into the conversation. What are the key values that students should be thinking about with regard to social justice, equity, and inclusion on campus?
For me, I would definitely say when we're talking about key values, for the first one, it's important to know your whys. So what is your encouraging factor to getting involved with activism? And then it's like after that, because it's not easy to do, what motivates you, what is going to motivate you to stay involved and to remember, especially when things get rough. I would say the second thing is mental health. Practicing your mental health is really going to make or break you in this field because it can be very taxing on you. And I would say the last thing that is important would definitely be to study your topic, your niche in organizing. So whether if that's food security or if it's voting and voter registration, or if it's just whatever it is that you choose, make sure that you're studying your topic thoroughly, as well as looking at what other fields of organizing are studying. So that way, if you need to cross-connect, it's easier to do so.
And what do you suggest, Serenity?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, definitely. So we're just asking, what are the key values that students should be thinking of about with regard to social justice, equity, and inclusion on campus?
Oh, I second what Dion said. You should know your whys. Everyone is different. Everyone has grown up differently. Nobody has the same ideals as another person exactly. And that's my personal belief. But figure out what is important to you and what you would like to change in the world or make better.
What about you, Belle?
Well, for me, I think it's really important to know the communities that you're serving. It's essential when you're serving communities that you understand the grassroots organizing of it, and you can't just be like someone who comes out of nowhere and doesn't know the communities they're serving and are trying to have like that white savior syndrome that comes along with it. Like that's really important to understand the communities that you're serving and be willing to learn. I feel like a lot of times it's when people tell you you're wrong, people get offended really easily. So it's really important to be open-minded and be willing to learn the process of it as well. There is a comment in the chat box. Is there a key major or course on campus that you would suggest that would help students with student activism?
For me, I would definitely encourage everybody to look into taking a sociology class. And if you still need your writing credential, I would say Soc 130 WS, which is it's a phenomenal course. But honestly, taking any course with a sociologist on campus or within the sociology major, I think is a really great start to really become familiar with the ins and outs of organizing, because that's essentially what that field is about, how to go into nonprofit work, which is what organizing usually falls under, and how to really process that, as well as talking about real world issues. So like what political science is doing, what psychology is doing, and figuring out a way to fuse those two together to make sure that the community at a local level is protected and taken care of.
Would y'all feel like ethnic studies is essential to students learning their about student activism on campus?
I wouldn't say necessary. I do think it helps a lot. I'm sorry, y'all. I have my son right here. I do think it helps a lot. It helps you understand the history as well as how it connects today. But yeah, it definitely helps. I believe so.
For me, when I think of ethnic studies, I think that it's almost a crucial part of your learning experience, especially at a collegiate level, because the way that our K through 12 education system is set up, you're not even getting like 1/3 of anybody's history unless it's like white history. And even then, it's always usually geared towards whatever side won, not the side that was oppressed. So I think it's important when you get to college to explore the histories of other cultures, because like a lot of people, when you talk about slavery in the civil rights movement, like for example, the civil rights movement wasn't really that long ago. Yet the way we talk about it makes it seem like it's centuries old. Like the pictures that you look at are all in black and white, not in color. And that's like a key distinction, almost probably intentional. I know for me, when we're talking about like Japanese internment camps, I read like a book on it in, I want to say high school, and that was it. And then it was like one line in my history textbook, when we know that that was something that was damaging to the Japanese Americans that are here, and that probably is still having an effect on them and their families. I would say another example is just like for me, when I was in elementary school, my teacher had us build a mission for a class project when we were learning about Native Americans. And it's like, not at all was it taught to us that those were just another form of like slave houses, essentially. Like that's why they were created. So I think that they're almost crucial to understanding. And I find that with a lot of like white conservatives that I come across with organizing, it's a lot of what they're experiencing is one, a lack of exposure to the histories of people of color, and two, a lack of knowledge, because the only thing they're getting is what's taught in their history classes, which like I said is very white based, and then they're going off of what's passed down through their family's histories, right? Which if you're coming from a family that may have been historically racist, maybe even owned slaves at one point or another, there's going to be a piece of that history that still trickles down. So I think that it's an important thing to help with the learning and unlearning process that everybody as an adult needs to go through.
There's another question in the chat. Do you think Fresno State is doing a good job at equity and inclusion?
I think that when you talk about Fresno State, right, the things that we pride ourselves on are diversity, discovery, and distinction, I want to say. I think those are the three. And we really, really pride ourselves on the diversity aspect, which is, I think, a valid claim, because we are a Hispanic serving institution. We are an Asian American and Pacific Islander institution, which means those are two groups that we cater towards, as well as like we have a very large, we're not predominantly, but we have a very large white Caucasian population on our campus. So when you're talking about diversity, it definitely exists. For Black students there's only about like, there's like less than 600 of us on campus, and that's graduate student, part-time and full-time. So when we talk about equity and inclusion, and you're looking at programs like EOP, I think it is, Upward Bound, Summer Start programs, whatever have you, those programs are supposed to be geared towards everybody, but you'll see a lot of like numbers, for example, like Black students, which that's the lens I'm gonna talk from, because I'm a Black woman who goes to Fresno State, and these are my experiences, right? Like when we look at probation and disqualification, Black students make up about 50% of those who will be either on probation or disqualified from Fresno State. So when we talk about equity and inclusion, those are all pieces of that. For a minute in 2016, my freshman year when I was coming in, that's when the Black students here lobbied and got a Harambe retreat, which was a first time overnight experience for incoming Black freshmen, because there's like only 600 of us on campus. And when you, like I said, spread that out and you're talking about only full-time students, that number drops drastically. So we have a very hard time finding community on campus. And it was like after its first year, there was about, I think, over 30 students, Black students, who participated, but there was claims saying that it was racist to do so, so they expanded it. And then the next year, there was only 7 Black students that were a part of it. So that's a product of the equity and inclusion that Fresno State offers. And it really just continues to expand. When you talk about like the racism or discrimination that students are experiencing and how the university handles that, or when you think about, for example, like our cross-culture and gender center, which is a phenomenal space on campus for students to find a safe haven. If you walk through that hall and you look at any of the rooms, for the most part, it'll be represented by people who identify with either that culture or that infinity group, right? Yet when you walk past the Harambe room, the room that's meant for Black students, rarely will you ever see Black students in there. And it's not because we don't want to go to the CCGC, right? It's because every time we go in there, when you're the only Black person walking in and you see a bunch of non-Black faces, it's like a scary experience. Like, this is the one space you're supposed to go to feel included, right? To feel safe, and it's not even offered to you. So, or open to you. So it's like, when I think about equity and inclusion, I would say that there's a lot that Fresno State still has room to grow. But that doesn't mean that we can't get there in the near future. So I don't know if that really answers the question, but I think that's the best explanation I have.
Oh, yeah, I completely agree. I remember like when the Harambe the event first happened, it was like specifically designed for Black students. And I remember the following year they included all students, because a lot of students were giving the program a lot of beef for being like, well, it's kind of like it's exclusionary because we can't do it just because we're a Black person. And I remember I got a lot of beef, but then when we have other programs on campus, like for example, I'm Asian, like nobody really questions like the Asian community for having a Asian designs programs. So I understand like that's something that like I will never face discrimination towards as a student and as an Asian American. So like just like listening to you talk about that, like that's something I completely resonate with, because there's an API group at CCGC. I go there all the time and it's always filled with Asian people, and it's an area where I can feel safe and comfortable. So thank you for sharing that too. Serenia, it looked like you want to make a comment. Let me go ahead and, so if you'd like to. Okay, cool. Thank you again for sharing that, Deangelique. I really do appreciate that. So we just are curious, like y'all have led such phenomenal events. For example, the protests that happened in the spring. We just wanted to ask you, like, where did you learn your values, and how did you come to commit to these values? You mentioned a little earlier about how it's really important to study your niche areas. Where did y'all begin from that?
I would say for both of us, it's really the NAACP. So that's like, I don't know, Serenity, like you could definitely piggyback on this if you have a different experience, but it's like the leadership that you get from the NAACP, from the Youth and College Division of the NAACP, it's like unmatched. Like our national director, Tiffany Dina Lofton, she's so involved with what we're doing on the ground, even though she's running like the largest civil rights organization for youth and college, for those under the age of 25. So it really starts there. Like the NAACP offers a lot of workshops to help you further yourself. They connect you with mentors in your field. And this could be anybody from like a local activist in your area, or if you're interested in going to business, one of the top CEOs in the country that's also Black. So there's a lot of opportunities to learn and expand in this world and on this growth. And I came in as a junior, so I think it would be cool for Serenity to kind of talk about her perspective, because she came in as a freshman.
Yeah, I joined NAACP my freshman year, I believe within a month of coming onto campus, fall 2018. And right away, I was like, I need to get involved in something. In NAACP, I saw mentors in this org. I saw mentors, and since they've helped me advance myself further professionally, as you know, our meetings are very by Robert's Rules of Order exactly. So advancing ourselves professionally, meeting people, having those connections, as well as just always learning, being open to always learning, especially in this field that we're in.
Thank you for that. So I know like y'all mentioned a little bit about networking. What support networks, role models, and educational experiences have helped you develop your values? You mentioned Tiffany Lofton.
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Yeah, definitely. So the question I asked are because y'all talked about how you were networking, built professionalism. What were some of the support networks, role models, and educational experiences that have helped you develop your values?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of different just mentors that you can find in the NAACP. So like I did say, Tiffany Dina Lofton, we also have Wisdom Cole and Derek Lewis and Jaslyn Livingston, who are the main staff that you can find at the national level for the NAACP. But it goes deeper than that. Like we have a local adult branch for the NAACP, Fresno NAACP, because we're Fresno State NAACP, where we can go for communication and relations. We also have our state team. So our state advisor, Satia Austin, is like, if you need anybody to hold you accountable for anything or to teach you things, she's definitely the woman that we go to. She's always got the answers. She's quick with it. And she makes sure that she's teaching us on the way. And she's never afraid to be like, oh, you're doing this part of the process wrong. So let's sit back, analyze it, and see how we can move forward. I would also say that the Black community here locally has been such a big impact on us both. Like when you need something, it's beautiful to be able to go to somebody like one of your elders, or that just means someone who's older than you, who's more established, and say, hey, like I'm struggling in this area, and to have them be there. Like there's a lot of learning activities or learning experiences that you can get just by reaching out and being a part of the community, which like you said, Belle, like one of the things that you think is important is connecting with that community. And here, because the Black population is so small, just overall, whenever we do events within the community, it's really easy for us to connect and find those mentors that we need. And I don't know, Serenity, if you had anything to add on to that? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think national team is wonderful. They do such a wonderful job guiding us and helping us when we have questions. But even for me as a freshman coming on, it was more so at the people who were in our unit prior to myself and Dion coming on the exec committee. So I'm sorry. Our past president, one of our past presidents, Cherie, wonderful. She was a great mentor to me. And then I saw Dion as a mentor to me as well. Coming on, I actually didn't even know it was Dion's first year in NAACP the same time I was, because she already seemed so ahead of the game, if that made sense.
Don't make me cry. Don't make me cry. Friend. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, I completely agree with everything you just said, Serenity. Like when I first met you two, I was like, wow, y'all are remarkable like leaders, not just like women, like leaders in general. Like the work that you do is incredible. And like when I've chatted with Dion, the few times I've chatted with Dion, it's like she always has her stuff together. And like you two, Serenity, like you're always like down and you respond so quick. And I just appreciate like all the work y'all do, not just for NAACP, but for the entire community. And I think it's just really important to say out right now, especially as kind of one of the more privileged minorities, that it's important to recognize that Black Lives Matter, because it really does benefit the entire community. And the work that y'all did over the spring, it really impacts all the communities in really positive ways, even if people may not see that. So I just want to say thank you. And like, y'all are awesome. And we really do appreciate all the activism y'all do, not only for Fresno State, but off campus in Fresno and the Central Valley as well. We do have a couple questions in the chat box. So we just wanted to know, like, I know y'all talked about how you got involved in NAACP when you came on campus. Did you come to college with intentions of getting involved in activism, or did it just kind of happen organically?
I'll go first.
Like Chuckles.
Yeah. I knew when I came to school So I'm originally from San Luis Obispo County. I've lived all throughout that county. So I came to Fresno. It's not too far, but it's also not so close, you know, to home. I needed to get involved with something to find community away from home. And I just came looking for community, if that made sense. And that just happened to be this word.
I had no intention of coming to Fresno State. To be real with you, that's why I was laughing, because it was really by the blessing of the universe that I ended up here. There was a few other schools that I wanted to go to, and not a one was in California. But like, just from having two other siblings that were going to be in college at the same time, it was the more financially just correct, I guess, for lack of better words, decision to go with, because, you know, just being mindful of that. And so when I came to Fresno State, I honestly came in with the idea, like the thought process of, man, like, I don't want to be here. Like, the first time I ever came to the Central Valley was Dog Days my freshman year. So it was like a culture shock, being somebody who like grew up in the city. Like, it was a culture shock. So for me, my mindset was, I'm just going to keep my head down and finish out my 4 years and get out. And then it was like, I found the NAACP, I found this Black community here at State. And then I think the thing that really like just drove it home for me was the campaigning period, Belle, when you and I were both running for ASI president, and the way that we were just exposed to the overall culture, the different just niches, the different ethnicities, and yeah, just cultures that existed on our campus. It was like something that really made me appreciate Fresno and Fresno State so much more. Like, it felt like I went on campus and the trees like started shining and stuff, because it was like just so much more of a positive place. So I didn't think that I would come to Fresno State. And when I talk about getting involved in organizing, I didn't think that I would do that here either. I've always had a passion for it. Like, I've been organizing since I was 12. But it's like, here, I really was just gonna keep my head down. And then God just called me to do the work that I'm doing, and I love every second of it. So, you know, everything by chance, I feel, are the best things that happen.
Yeah, I just want to chime in too. Like, I feel like running for the campaign, like that's when we first met, right? And I was kind of like, wow, like this person, like in the previous experiences, like when you look at the presidential tickets, like there were never like people of color, you know, like it was usually dominantly like white. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not gonna really have any challenges like with diversity. And then here I meet a woman of color, and I'm like, oh shoot, like game's on now, like it's real. And like I just feel like meeting you as an ally, though, it was like such a great experience, and like it definitely is one of the better things I got out of the presidential election. And I feel like I agree with you too. Like, it really showed me like all the diversity we have on campus and the power we have as students to like ignite the activism within our students on campus. We do have another comment in the chat. This is from Pahoa. It's asking, is it ethical to have student activism during a pandemic, even if they're fighting their own ethical ideas?
So that was something that for our protests that we actually really grappled with, because COVID was like at its height, especially in the Central Valley, because for whatever reason, people are protesting wearing masks, which, you know what, hey, it is what it is, I guess. But it was something that we definitely paused for. But then it's like, when you talk about ethics, right, being ethical, morally right, it's like comparing marching for our lives in a city where Black people are victims of over 40% of hate crimes, where we traditionally practice in our community, in our county, concealed carry and stand your ground, right? Because the opposite of stand your ground, mind you, these are the same policies that got Trayvon Martin killed. The opposite of stand your ground is called castle law, which any other state that hasn't implemented stand your ground practices castle law. And then it's up to your counties, right? Your police chief, your sheriff's department to decide on how that's implemented, and your DAs as well. So it's like thinking about the hate crimes, thinking about the fact that George Floyd for 8 minutes and 46 seconds had a knee in the back of his neck for the presumption of having a counterfeit $20 bill. right? It's like thinking of organizers like Oluwatoyin Selu, who lost her life because she was out there advocating for change, right? You think about that, like you think about Tamir Rice, you think about Sandra Bland, you think about Eric Garner and Erica Garner, right? Who Eric Garner was murdered, and then Erica Garner, because she fought so hard for change, actually ended up dying an early death from, I believe it was either a heart attack or a stroke. Like, these are the things that we have to do just to be seen as human, right? So it's like, it doesn't matter what time it is, and it doesn't matter what's happening in the world. If there's an opportunity for us to stand up and fight for freedom, right? Not just simply liberation, because liberation is the act of setting free, and freedom is the literal, like, encompassing of being free, which Black people, I would argue, have never experienced in this country and arguably over the world, throughout the world, right? It's like, when you're talking about reaching a point of freedom, it's like, I would give anything to feel comfortable knowing that my little brother, when he walks to school or walks to one of his friends' houses, right, that I know that he's going to be safe walking. And just because he's 16 and 6'4" and looks like a grown man, that's not going to cost him his life, right? So it's like, that's why we push so hard for our protests, for people to practice social distancing, to practice safe and healthy precautions. Like, we encourage people to get COVID-19 testing, and Serenity worked really hard to look up a lot of the local clinics in the area immediately after our protest to make sure that people were taking advantage of that. Because at the end of the day, like, I would give my life to make sure that my little brother and those around me could experience freedom one day. And it's like, that shouldn't come at the cost of a pandemic, right? But it's like, at the same time, like, if not now, then when? You know what I mean? It's like, that's really the mindset, like, because it wasn't just George Floyd, right? It started this year, really kicked off with the main Black Death murder that we saw was the literal hunting of Ahmaud Arbery, who went for a run in, I believe it was a Cornell sweater, right? Like, literally minding his own business, to be hunted down like an animal by two men for no reason, because they thought he was in the wrong place. And then to see all of the other Black death come after that, like, if not now, then when we're talking about ethics, right? When we're talking about being ethical, like, when are we supposed to fight for that? You know what I mean? Like, so that's kind of my perspective and how I view it. But like I said, we really push hard for people to practice that social distancing and to get tested regularly. Like, I get tested once a month just because of the work that I do. So I think there's two sides to every coin, but it's important to understand, acknowledge, and accept what side of the coin is heavier. Tony, I don't know if you wanted to add.
Yeah, I want to echo what you said. You hit it spot on, but like, especially your, I believe was an analogy to your little brother. Like, same with me. Like, I have a little brother. People don't realize, or I guess we do realize, when we see all this Black death, we see our family. We see people we love. That could have been so-and-so. That could have been my little cousin. That could have been, you know, anyone in my family. That person looks like me. That sort of stuff. So exactly what you said, Dion, I would lay my life down for any one of my family members behind this work.
Also keeping in mind, like, Serenity at this very moment, right, during this entire panel, she's holding her baby boy, and he's eventually going to grow up to become a man, right? So it's like, if we can't fight now in this time period to ensure that Black men aren't being hunted and lynched, right? Because out of the 4 lynchings that made it to the news when COVID first started, 3 of those were in California, right? So it's like, really thinking about what happens when her son grows up if we don't fight now, like how our grandparents and our ancestors have been fighting just to get these little inches forward. Then what is the world going to look like when he's an adult? Because right now, I would argue that the moment we're in is just as big as the civil rights movement of the 60s. Like, we're in such an interesting moment in history, and it isn't until it's over, when it's all documented, that people are really going to realize what all of this work is doing and what it's establishing and what we're getting out of it, you know, from like a positive perspective. So yeah, that's how I view it. That's how I view it. It's kind of like the Batman analogy. I don't know, not to like be on a high horse for this, but if you guys have ever seen one of the Batman movies where the Joker put a bomb, arguably in a passenger boat, like of civilians, and then put a bomb in the boat of criminals and said, yo, one of these boats has to blow up the other one by the end of the night. If you can't stop me, Batman, and let's see who does it. And it's like really thinking like, at the end of the day, that's still human life, right? So it's like, how do you rationalize, and who are you supposed to choose, right? And it's like, why do we even have to choose, right? Like, we shouldn't be here fighting for our lives. And at the end of the day, like I said, we're doing everything we can to make sure that those who are marching alongside us are protecting their safety, so that way nobody has to pull a trigger. You know what I mean? But it's like, we can't not fight for our existence. We can't not fight for the lives of our brothers, our sisters, our siblings, our cousins, our aunts, our uncles, because we're seeing them die every day, like every day. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing personal experience. I think it's really important to see how it ties to people that we see every day, like our neighbors, our friends and family, and students on campus. It's really important to recognize that y'all face things that like me as an individual never face. And like, I just want to say like, thank you. That's really important to recognize. So we also want to know, like, as the question that was asked about student activism on campus, what can students and others do to get involved in the work that y'all do, and to kind of like ignite that activism within students? I know y'all said that you found it through NAACP and through doing like campaigns on campus, but how, like, what can you ask of students on campus and others to get involved in the work that y'all do?
I would say right now it's kind of hard, honestly, to get people involved in this work, because it's like, it's something that you either really have to have a calling for, right, to start, or it's something that has to appeal to you. And then through that mutual exchange, right, through that conversation of somebody explaining to you why it's important, how they'll have your back, and, you know, just like what getting involved is like, those are usually the two options on why people join organizations like the NAACP, or just social organizations or social organizing, social activism organizations, period. But it's like, in the time of COVID right now, one, nothing is face to face for the most part. So that makes it hard for us to do the work we're doing. And two, like, people have a lot going on in their lives. But I think when things do return to normal, it's important, if you're a Fresno State student, even now, right? Because there are a bunch of these clubs and organizations that are active. It's important to realize that Fresno State has over 300 active clubs and organizations, all with their own calling, right? So like, Fresno State, NAACP, for example, NAACP period overall, our goal is to establish the social, economic, political, educational, all the types of freedoms, like, for everybody, right? But it's like, at the core of that, we acknowledge and we push for the liberation and the freedom of Black people, because from our organization's perspective and what we were founded in, right? Because it started with the lynching of Black men in the 1900s. It's like, if you're going to come and be involved in the NAACP, then it's important that you think about organizing and activism from that lens, right? From the lens of, we acknowledge that Black people are at the bottom when you put together all of our intersectionalities, but what we're working towards is equity, right? So there is no bottom, and we all rise together. And there's going to be organizations of their own accord that are going to look at organizing from different perspectives. Like I said, like, if you're really called by food insecurity, or if you're called by working with foster youth or homelessness, right? There are organizations that each have those niches, and it's important just to kind of discover that. I believe it's either our student involvement page or our associate student bodies page, ASI's page, that has a complete list of all of the organizations, as well as contact numbers. And Engage exists, right? That's a platform we use, and you can usually get in contact with organizations that way. If you are interested in being a part of the Fresno State chapter of the NAACP, we only have 2 requirements. One, that you be currently operating on the campus of Fresno State. So whether you're employed, if you're an employee at Fresno State, and or if you're a current student, then you can be a part of our organization. And we were required to be an active member, right? So to be a committee chair, or to be president or hold an executive position, that you be either 25 or under the age of 25. If you're over the age of 25, then we encourage you to become a general member and to become a committee member, right? Not a committee chair. because this is the youth and college division, and unfortunately it's at the age of 25 when the NAACP kind of cuts off the youth and collegiate division. So those are the ways you can get involved with us. But I did mention earlier that we do have an adult branch in the area, the Fresno NAACP, and they're open. They're always looking for members. We're all these organizations are looking for members because our membership is our lifeline. Looking to get involved with them, or like I said, just looking at Fresno State, what orgs are around, even connecting like with just different nonprofits. Looking at EOC is a good place to look at different organizations because they house a lot of them through their board of commissioners. So that would be my recommendations.
I would also like to say you should go out and volunteer. Find different types of things you can volunteer for to see if you find that calling, or if you have that calling, see what you care about, and then try to make it better, try to change things.
And the last thing I'll say is it's important to remember that you're not getting paid to do this work, right? Like none of us are that's why it's called nonprofit, because you do not get paid. So it's completely volunteer. And it's important to find an organization or a chapter that understands the importance of being a college student, right? Balancing your mental health and working and balancing your organization of choice. That's really gonna make or break your experiences. And in understanding that it's volunteer, you always have the option to say no, right? You always have the option to step down. And at the end of the day, like the whole point of organizing is to be able to practice accountability and adaptability. So even though it may be helpful to have you there, it's never helpful to have you there at the expense of your own mental or physical health. So I would encourage that as well when going in and looking for different organizations to be a part of, is realizing your workload, or if you know your workload and you get involved and things change in terms of what you can handle, being okay with saying, hey, I just can't do this right now, or I need support here right now because I can't fully do this while I transition. Just don't be afraid to speak up. Like as you're advocating for others, make sure that in this field, you're also advocating for yourself.
I was about to say the same thing. Personally for me, I am a student, I work, I'm currently employed by Fresno's EOC. I'm also a mother of a child under the age of 1. And yeah, just balancing everything, as well as NAACP being a chair, especially after we did the protest. That was a big event for me, just because we were already in a pandemic. Everything was being pushed out via our social media and like our email listserv. So that was all technically under me and my position. So balancing each of these, I had to lean on my executive committee more than I would have normally, just because it was so much. And being able to do so is something that I don't take for granted. And that's what makes me want to continue this work, because I know I can lean on them for different tasks that I may need to do. Like, hey, could you do this for me, please? I'm currently like my son is having a meltdown, or I have a homework assignment. Having a team that understands these things and understanding that life happens is one thing, because this work does get very stressful at times. So definitely having a team that understands that is wonderful.
And just for context, this is the last thing I'm going to say. When she talks about how it all fell under her, she's not lying. Like Serenity is our like secret superstar, as well as our secretary. Like it's crazy what they have to do, right? So it's like, for context, an example, our social media blew up overnight, essentially. So we went from having like 400 to 500 followers to 1,700. And Serenity was the person who fielded all of that, like all of the inquiries, the posts, everything that came with that, contacting. So it was important for us to have already had that open connection, that open established like form of communication, where I let them know like mental health, I'm very big on mental health. Oh my goodness, I'm so big on mental health. It's like should be a crime how serious I am about mental health. So it's like, it's really important to me that like my executive committee members feel like they have a safe space to say, hey, right now, like I just literally can't do this. And like, it's important for me as a leader to be like, okay, let's find somebody who either can, or let's be comfortable with putting it on the back burner. Because at the end of the day, like I promise you, like, there's nothing more important than your mental and your physical health, as well as your spiritual health. So it's like, that's why it's important to be able to find organizations and clubs who value that as well and mirror that, because, or if you're the one going in and you don't see it, to make sure that you're the person to establish it. Because it goes a long way in this work. Like with everything we're doing, for the most part, throughout this entire process, like since May, there's only been 4 of us doing all of this, right? So it's like, and we're all still in college, like Serenity said, like she has a baby on top of that. We all work full time, like we're all in school, like, you know what I mean? So that's super big in this work.
Thank you for that, Yael. We do have a couple questions in the chat. So Julie asked, how has your experience as an activist changed your perspective on ethics?
We have more, if possible, Julie, more context on what you mean by ethics. Are we talking about like our morals? Are we talking about how we view the world? Like, what do you mean by ethics?
Julie did respond, yes, morals. So I'll go ahead and repeat the question. How has your experience as an activist changed your perspective on ethics?
I would say overall, when I first started getting involved in this work, I found myself becoming more angry with the world and with those around me, because it's like, man, like you go through all this work to try to like help establish this equity, and then you realize that there are people around you who would do everything they can not to change the system as it currently stands, because 1, the system either serves them, or 2, the system serves them and they don't want to acknowledge that it's serving them at the expense of other people. So it's like just really having to grapple with that and thinking like, yo, a lot of this stuff that we deal with could honestly be changed if people just said, oh man, like that's hurting somebody else, and I'm okay with giving a little to give some, right? Or giving a little to get something back in return. So it's like, just that's how I started. But it's like, now that I'm here, I feel like it's made me a lot more open-minded. Like for me, I am not a Trump supporter. But from this work and my niche in organizing before protesting, my real niche is voter education and participation. Like getting people registered to turn out to vote, to make sure they're knowledgeable, to me is like something I hold very near and dear to my heart, because I believe that that's a very fast way to change. So it's like, in getting people registered to vote, you don't discriminate in that in any type of way, it's like form or fashion. And I've had a lot of Trump supporters really challenge me on my viewpoints without knowing how I stood politically, because I was a Black woman and because I was looking to get people organized. Like, so it's like the conversations I had, that's why I said earlier, like that's why ethnic studies is important. Because what I found through these conversations, when I learned how to calm down and interact with them and say, well, why do you think this way about Black people? Well, why do you feel this way about low income individuals? Why do you feel this way about the projects or the ghettos, right? Or the hood, however you refer to it. And then finding out that it's really just a lack of knowledge mixed with privilege, which we all have a lack of knowledge in some field and we all have privilege in some capacity. So it's like, I became way more open-minded, and it really helped me in just communicating with people just in my daily lives, and made me feel more comfortable with standing up and sticking up for the things that mattered, because I understood that a lot of the times it's really just from a lack of awareness on how their actions, viewpoints, or words are impacting those around them. So I don't know if that answers the question. Morally, I feel like I'm still hopefully a good person, but that's just like the process of anger and then becoming open-minded. Like that's kind of how I shifted.
I think that definitely answers the question, but I'd also like to hear from Serenity. So I'm just going to repeat the question. How has your experience as an activist changed your perspective on ethics, especially since you jumped into NAACP right when you got into college?
Yeah, ethics, we're speaking in terms of morals, right?
Yes.
If anything, it's made me more radical in my personal beliefs, because just seeing our leaders at like city council meetings and things like that just decide, oh, we're going to give this much money here, this much money here, and not really, I don't know, seeing the way that people are living in certain districts, and then seeing the council members decide we're just going to give this money, like, not here, or I don't know, things like that. But they have the power to make people's lives better. It's definitely made my personal beliefs and morals like way more radical, if anything. But yeah.
Thank you. I know this this also been the first year I sat in like a council member like discussion. I was in some ways shocked. But yeah, I just want to say thank you for sharing that. Like I also just want to push out there that if you are a student watching, you should definitely like attend one of the town meetings so you can see how it is, because it is really eye-opening, for lack of a better term. So I'm gonna go and look at the chat box too. I just want to remind everyone that you are welcome to ask questions. We have about 15 minutes left, and it's really important if you have questions to ask them right now, because Serenity and Deangelique are very busy people. So this is probably your only opportunity to ask if you'd like to ask. There are a couple of questions as well. One of the people being asked, how did you get the courage to speak out in this way? What made you so courageous?
I can go first because this question is actually super, and sorry for the background noise. This question though was like super near and dear to my heart. Whoever asked it, like it means a lot to me because I I struggle with anxiety. Like I really push mental health because I understand from a personal perspective how important it is. Like I'm somebody who is diagnosed with bipolar 2 disorder. So on top of that, like just struggling with anxiety, like it's always been very hard for me to speak up. And I remember like being in middle school and just like having to close my eyes just to say something that I thought would make somebody uncomfortable or that I thought would hurt their feelings, to now like being able to lead like one of the two out of the top 50 cities in our country, or largest 50 cities in our country, one of two peaceful protests that this country has ever seen, like, and being able to do that while turning around and reading the list of demands and looking straight in Chief Hall's face, like his eyes, and saying, this is what we want and this is why we want it. This is where your department has wronged us. It's like, man, I've come such a far way. And it's like just asking myself, like literally, I remember I read a journal entry for mine in 8th grade, and it literally said, and I quote, "I hope I never have to do public speaking again." And it's like, man, whew, Dion, you're in for it. Quite a shock when you get older, sis. Like just me, like older Dion talking to younger Dion, like, man, we've come a long way. Like, and it's like, how did I get here? And for me, I think what pushed me here was learning about what people go through. Like Serenity was saying, like there are literally people struggling, dying, like homeless, hungry, like in food deserts right now, and in like Fresno and West and South Fresno. Like literally the water in Southwest Fresno is comparable to Flint, Michigan, but if you go to the north end, it's like perfectly safe to drink out of the tap. And it's like you learn about things like that and realize that you're in a position, or you're putting yourself in positions to speak up. And it's like, how could you not? You know what I mean? Like when you understand what's at stake, like people's lives, I think that's really what gave me the superpower, if you will call it, to speak up. Like that was definitely like my version of like just becoming a superhero, was just doing the research and learning just about like how these different people are studying in or struggling in their own aspect or their own respects. Like when you talk about intersectionality, like it's just like, man, me being uncomfortable for the 15 minutes I have to talk versus being able to establish in some like moments, hopefully in all of them, to be able to establish like a lifetime of happiness, joy, and freedom. Like I think I can inconvenience myself for 15 minutes, right? And then it's like, the more I did it, even if I had to do it with my eyes closed, which I had to for a very long time, like it became easier. It became a lot easier the more that I started to do it. So my advice would be, if that's something you're struggling with, put yourself in the position, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and say it anyways. And I promise you, somebody out there is going to appreciate you for it. And it's only going to make you a stronger person.
I definitely wanted to say the same thing as Dion. I also, growing up, I struggled a lot with social anxiety. I was always like a weird, awkward kid. But Dion said, once you realize that it's people's lives we're dealing with, like people are homeless, hungry, and more, and you're put in these positions to speak up, why would you not? why would you not fight for what you believe in and what you believe is just and right, especially if you have a support system backing you. But yeah, I was definitely the kid who had to like practice saying here for roll call in my head multiple times. And like my last name starts with a W. I was always at the end. So they're calling everybody else's name. I'm sitting there like, here, like just saying it different ways because the anxiety. And then now I spoke a little bit at the protest, and that was just like so much. And you still see it today. Like even now, I'm in the background kind of all of our stuff. I still get work done, but I like being in the back just of all of the projects that we take on.
That's another thing that I was going to say, like just listening to you talk Serenity, I think it's really important too to understand like not everybody has to be at the forefront, right? So like our secretary, for example, she really, like when you look at the structure of an organization, the secretary is the internal president, but you will probably never see her face. Like you call Fresno State's NAACP's number, you're hearing the voice of our secretary. But because she's somebody who doesn't like to be like at like the face of things, that doesn't change the fact that she's running things internally, right? Making sure that people are getting their reports in on time, responding to emails, making sure that people are addressing us correctly. Like there's so much that you can do outside of being the face of things. And honestly, like from being somebody who was a secretary and now president, like both, I can promise you, are going to be equally rewarding to those around you because both are crucial. Like what Serenity does, running our social medias, handling our press releases, like that is crucial to the survival of this unit because it's how people learn about us. Like, you know what I mean? So there's more to than just being the face of something. And if you try it out and you find that like, man, yeah, no, speaking just really isn't it for me. Like, don't give up, don't feel discouraged. Like there's other ways that organizations could use people. Like it's still important that you show up if it's something that you're called to, and it doesn't have to be, like I said, like at the face, because leaders come in every form, shape, like fashion that you could think of. It's not just about being in the front. It's about just making sure you're leading people in the right direction from where you stand. So wanted just to throw that in there.
I know we talk a lot about like students because student activism is very important, but I think faculty are also curious. So what are ways that faculty can support student activism?
Shameless plug, shameless plug. So I said earlier, if you're interested in becoming a member of the Fresno State NAACP, you either have to be under the age of 25 or you have to be under the age of 25 and or currently operating on the campus of Fresno State. So for our professors, right, or faculty and staff that are there, the NAACP on campus could absolutely still use your support. You do have to pay the adult fee. Like for youth in college, the fee for us is $10. For adults, it's $30. But it's like by doing that, you could, like I said, become a committee member. So if you're a professor that operates under like mass and multimedia, right? Like we have a press and publicity chair who could probably use some pointers, right? If you're a political science professor, right? We have a political action committee that could probably use your support. We have a few of the sociology department professors who are involved with us. I promise you, writing public statements is not easy. So if you're in the English department and you want to get involved, hey, like come talk to me because I could definitely use your help. You know what I mean? Like, so those are the ways that you could get involved. But also, I think when we're talking about, just going back to earlier, talking about that equity and inclusion, making sure that you're advocating for those unseen students in your classes. Like, I know for me, it doesn't matter what class I've taken at State, like I've never had more than 2 other Black people in a classroom with me. And the things that I've heard professors say, because they're protected by tenure, like there's a lot of Black students who have been either called the N-word in class or have had a professor say it and then wait for them to react to make it a teaching moment. Like literally something that happened to me is I said, hey, you saying that like N-word with the hard R makes me uncomfortable. And the professor saying, well, oh, it's just a learning moment. Like who's to say the word is bad? And then thinking to myself, like, he said a bunch of other offensive terms, but it's like, no, he didn't. He referenced a lot of other groups who had been discriminated against. Like he said Jews or gays, and then he said N-words. Like, how was I not supposed to feel personally attacked by that? So if you know that there are other professors within your department who are doing things that are discriminatory or that don't take students' best interest at mind, like, I'm calling on you right now to stand up and say something, even if it's subliminal, right? Even if it's not like just straight up, if it's like what's the word, like microaggressions, even if it's micro, like still saying something could literally like be the thing that either makes or breaks a student of color, or to be explicit, a Black student's experience. Because as we said earlier, we have no home on campus. So it's important to make sure that as our professors, you're also being our allies in that and educating yourself. Because even though you may study one field, there's a bunch of other fields out there that are affecting Black students differently, and having that full perspective, like I said earlier, could make or break that student's interactions in terms of being felt and understood. So those would be my 2 recommendations. And if you are interested in becoming a member, reach out to us at naacp@mail.fresnostate.edu. It's literally just naacp at our regular student, our email handle, and let us know, and we can get you hooked up.
Do you have a comments, Rennie, that you'd like to maybe share?
Yeah, I know, Dion, you said something about how you were sometimes the only Black student in your classes. For me, being a computer science major and a Black woman, I was the only Black person in most of my classes. The only times I wasn't was when I took Africana Studies classes. Really, that's the only time. But especially in STEM majors, for me, the classes I've taken, I've met a lot of people who really, I just cannot, they really need some education, but one way to put it. But the types of things that I hear in my classes that are such like discriminatory things, and then just looking at my professor and them just not do anything, it affects my grades. It affects the way that I want to come to class and learn. It also messes with like my mental. It makes me feel that I'm not even welcome in class. So teachers, please, if you see things like this, stop it, nip it in the bud right the moment you see it. Or else those students who do practice discriminatory things, they'll just continue to do it, and it really won't get better unless you say something.
And just one other thing to add, because Trinity, like, I don't know, you just brought this to my mind, is understanding the time period that we're in right now and what it means to be Black in this moment, right? Like, as I said, like, there was 4 of us who led that protest for the most part, like, and who had to deal with everything that came with that. And then it's like, we went from doing like full organizing to then having to do full organizing and a full class load. And it's like, Breonna Taylor's murderers just got released on bail, right? And it's like, the reason like a charge came out in her case, or somebody was, they were indicted, was because the neighbors had a bullet go through their door, their wall, and it put their life in jeopardy. Meanwhile, Breonna Taylor still has not seen justice, right? And that's one example of, once again, the many Black deaths and the injustices that we've seen. Like, it's very hard to be Black right now. I don't know a single Black student in college, on top of COVID, on top of like our economy turning out the way that it is, on top of social media and not being able to open up without seeing another Black person die, or another like murderer of a Black person like be set free for whatever reason, because that's literally precedence. Like, that's how our law has established, like, that it's okay for Black people to be murdered. Like, understanding that that's affecting us in every way. So if you have a Black student that's in your class that's struggling right now, to be lenient and to reach out and ask them if they're okay, or see how you can support them in terms of mental health servicing. I'm gonna say it again. Maybe even consider incorporating another break in your class, like just establishing a week and saying, like, for an assignment this week, like, meditate and let me know just how many hours you meditated, whether they actually do it or not. Just being able to take a step back and breathe and say, man, like, at this moment, this is one thing that I don't have to worry about. could really save somebody's life in this climate. And I personally feel like there's not enough professors who are doing that, who are literally just saying like, oh, well, it's life, like, get over it. It's like, we have so much more on our backs right now, like literally, that we're literally carrying the whole world. Like a lot of these organizers you're seeing throughout these states that are organizing these protests, like I promise you a majority of them are under the age of 25. Like I'm 22, you know what I mean? And it's like one of two largest out of the top 50 cities, like one of two largest and most peaceful protests that this country, not even like the country, but to be more explicit, Fresno has seen. And it's like, I'm serving on the Commission for Police Reform. That's a full-time job. On top of that, I still have to go to school and still be president of this organization. So imagine like just what other Black students are experiencing around you, because we're all organizing in some way or capacity. Like we literally have to fight to prove that saying Black Lives Matter is a human rights issue and not a political issue. You know what I mean? So it's like taking that into account as you're going through and creating your lesson plans and interacting with your students and looking at their grades, like what else could be happening in their life right now, because it's not the same for everybody. Once again, talking about equity over equality, right? Equity over equality. How do we establish equity here and not just merely equality? Like, I think that that's an important thing to think about as well.
We are short on time, but I just want to have a closing remark. So we just like to ask, like, what are hopes that you have for the future? If you want to just include a small sentiment before we end.
You said hopes for the future?
Yes.
I just hope that at some point in the future we're able to live freely. I don't know. For me personally, I feel very constrained, just with political and social pressures, making the change that we want to see, letting everyone know if you see something, say something. And I mean that in terms of if you see discriminatory practices happening, you see it, say something. Going back to what I said earlier about that, speaking up when you see it immediately, because it won't get better, it'll only get worse and more violent.
I was gonna say the exact same thing. I hope for freedom, and I mean real freedom. Yeah, that's really it. I guess freedom and equity. I want those two things, and I hope to see that in my lifetime for everybody. So, yeah.
I'd like to thank NAACP again for the Fresno State Collegiate Chapter for being here today. We do really appreciate all your insight, and I just want to disclose that this video will be accessible through the Ethics Center Facebook and YouTube. And in the chat box, I have also included the Ethics Center and NAACP's Fresno State Collegiate Chapter social media, so please feel free to follow them as well. If you do have any more questions, please feel free to comment in the chat box, and we will email it to Serenity and Deangelique if they are available to answer them. So thank you again for being here today. We do appreciate y'all tuning in. Y'all have a great night.